Hey, shalom, and welcome to Wisdom in Torah Ministries. I'm always happy to be back and share with you what I'm learning. Today, I was spending a lot of time reviewing a lot of the information that I've studied about particular topic that is very dear to me. I've been studying ancient Near East now since 2009. In the last, wow, it's been like 10 weeks already. We recorded some videos. I've been have the privilege to do some one-on-one classes with now my ancient Near Eastern East professor and becoming a fast friend. He loves baseball. He's a Dodger fan. I know. We're still going to go pray for the guy to be delivered. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about ancient Near Eastern covenants and the Grand Covenant in light also in the New Testament. So in the Bible, there is what is called a grant. There are different types of covenants. You have ancient Near Eastern vassal, sovereign vassal, suzerain vassal treaties, say greater and a lesser. And then you have the parity covenants, which is the reason why people call themselves brothers and sisters, which
Right.
is really when it's dealing with same status under submitted under the same sovereign, and that we are his client and he's our patron. And then you have what is called a grant. Now, a grant, according to the Bible, is a gift. And we know even in the book of in the New Testament says that the gifts of God are irrevocable. Now, many people quote that verse, but they don't really understand the legality behind that. And today we're going to bring in Professor Chavalas, and we're going to be talking about the importance of understanding ancient Near Eastern grant covenants and how important it is to understand the Bible. How are you, Professor? How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How
And
about you?
I'm
Yeah.
doing good, but I'm going to start putting my Yankee stuff next to me. You always keep throwing those little things next to you right there. You see, you
Oh,
got the hat right there now.
I don't know what happened. I guess I guess I
Oh,
forgot to
you can
take
leave
it
it. Don't be ashamed. Don't be ashamed of the gospel of Dodgers. It's okay.
out. Well, I
Hey,
got this. My kids gifted me. This was a grant, by the way.
but wait a minute. I thought they gift to you one from the Yankees. What happened to that one? Because
Oh
your
no.
granddaughter is my favorite person right now.
Well, actually, I saw her yesterday, and we were talking about it, and she saw a Dodger hat, and I said, "Do you know what that is?" Is that a Yankees hat?" I said, "No. What Dodgers are blue. The Yankees are they're the dark side. They're black." Oh,
That's funny.
she's learning.
That's That's good. Well, let me go over some of the resources that I'm using today so the audience know where you recommended some of the information that I'm grateful enough to read a long time ago. And I spent the whole morning reviewing it. I learned a lot more and I was able to make more connections. This is a very interesting book edited by Frederick E. Greenspan. It has a collection of different essays, right, and articles. And one of them is Moshe Weinfeld about the Grand Covenants in the ancient Near East and Israel. It's amazing article about that, and it also has other writers like Charles Fensham, and it has William Moran, which I like his stuff.
Uh,
William Hallo, you know, and Yael Yadin, a really great archaeologist and a scholar. Spiegel. I mean, I highly recommend this resource. If you're not really a student of the ancient Near East, like Professor and I are, this is something that is really easy to read through and has a lot of great resource, and it has all the bibliography, and it's also great to build a library with. That's how I started with. I will go to the bibliography, and I began to start bringing out books that I wanted to read. So then I have another one that's really good is by Covenant, The History of Biblical Idea by Delbert Hillers.
yeah.
You also recommended this one.
Well,
And
yeah. In fact, I've got a copy somewhere, but since I had to move everything from my school office down to my basement, I couldn't find it. But it's down there somewhere.
okay, it's really good. I really like this one. I read this one a long time ago. And then this one is Declaration and Covenant. It is by the Rome Biblical Institute Press. It is by Paul Calubetil. I can't pronounce his name.
Yeah,
But he did a really amazing job explaining ancient Near Eastern language and the covenantal language declaration formula, like father, son, vassal, treaty, covenant, all those words. Actually, even we are all one. He actually connects that with ancient Near Eastern language
yeah.
of a covenantal treaty. That's quite nice. It's really interesting. So this is some of the stuff that we're reading. So, Professor, talk to us. We're going to talk about grant covenants, one of my favorite subjects.
Well, uh, when we mentioned this, I don't know, about a couple of weeks or so ago, you were interested in the one especially in Genesis 15. So I took a look at that one. You're still around there, aren't you?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Okay, good, good. All right, good. I couldn't
I'm
see it.
here. I'm
So,
just doing all kinds of things at the same time. So if you don't
yeah.
see me, just keep talking. I'm here.
Well, no, I do one thing at a time, and not even that sometimes. So I was looking at Genesis 15 and trying to figure out all of the strange rituals and covenants that are bizarre. And then I thought about what's going on with, well, we'll call him Abram since he doesn't have a name change yet. And I went back to Genesis 12 for a minute just to look again to find out. So what is Abraham doing when God approaches him? He's probably minding his own business. Uh, from our standpoint, it looks like it's a completely random pick, kind of like what Jesus does in the New Testament when he seems to pick disciples. From the human standpoint, it's as if he's closing his eyes and just picking 12 random guys, out of the out of the crowd. Um, and so what's Abram doing in Genesis 12? He's minding his own business. You've got to figure that he's 100% pagan when God calls him out. And it's interesting that God does not um, God does not tell him everything at the beginning. In fact, he tells him very little. I'm calling you out, and I'm going to bless you, and all the nations will be blessed through you, the goyim. And what has Abraham done for that? Nothing. What is Abraham's response? We don't find out anything about what Abraham's thinking really until three chapters later, after he does a bunch of stupid stuff in Egypt. Um, and of course, part of that, what's going on in Egypt, might be to show why the Israelites are getting gifts from Egypt later on. And then you got 14, and of course, Genesis 14 talks. I suppose it might be answering the question: whatever happened to his, his heir, Lot? And of course, Lot ultimately seems to be out of the picture because of 14. Then you come up to 15, and and there's a lot of. The more I looked at this, and of course, uh, I'm sort of biased because of this, but I see a lot of Mesopotamian stuff going on here in 15. Um, you know, uh, so it says the word of the Lord came to Abram, so that's the first verse.
Yeah,
Okay.
let me share real quick
Yes.
so the audience can read with me. They can read with you.
Yeah.
Um, all right, go ahead.
Okay. So the word of Yahweh came to Abram in a vision. What's going on here with this term? It's pretty much of a generic term. Um, Uh, and that word for shield, I suppose it could be protector also. In other words, it's literally a term for covering, and your reward will be great. What has he done there? And of course, Abraham starts arguing with him. Like I remember you talking to me before, however long that ago was, and he's arguing with God. I'm still childless, and I've got my heir is Eleazar of Damascus, and this might be kind of like what we talked about before, and in terms of inheritance uh, contract. And of course, God immediately, counters with, "No, that's not what's going to happen." Um,
So,
and
quick question: do you think that to understand the first the biblical narrative, it's interesting how Abraham is not really so much caring about him; he's only caring about his progeny. He wants to have somebody in the line to leave that. The role of a son in the ancient Near East is quite amazing. It would explain why the first thing he asks is, "I don't have an heir. What are you going to give me?" Because that was the most precious thing, I guess.
And by the way, any good Mesopotamian is going to think that way. And of course, an Israelite is too. For a Mesopotamian, and I know we've brought this up before, but it's nice for context, uh, that you want an heir because you know that this person's going to take care of you while you're old, but even more importantly, after you die. And so, right now, I'm pretty short on that. And I remember what your promise was back then. And of course, it's kind of like, you and I, let's say I promise to give you my car after I'm done with it. Well, that doesn't mean a whole lot until I write out a contract or
Right.
something.
Of course.
And that hasn't happened yet here. And that's
Yeah.
what 15 is for. But then stranger things happen if you think about what's going on here. In verse 5, he takes him out to look at the stars. And of course, any good Mesopotamian knows when you're looking at the stars up there, that's astral divination, uh,
Hmm.
in my opinion. So, in other words, I think that God has, and I want to make sure I say this correctly because I don't want to be theologically incorrect. I think God is using the existing situation that Abraham is in to help him understand something, although God himself transcends it. So, yeah, we can look at the stars. I know what you think of the stars. Um,
So do you think that, like, for example, the Sundervan, let me read the commentary in the Sundervan. Um, it says skilled astrologers in ancient Mesopotamia cataloged and tracked the stars, both constellations and individual stars. They recognized three paths: the path of Anu, Enlil, and Ea, three of the major cosmic deities, right? So they
yeah.
calculated. So by understanding the cosmology in the ancient world, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, what God is trying to make in a contrast. I will give you your inheritance. It's not maybe the gods that you serve. Because it's
Yeah.
peculiar, like you say. The first thing he goes, hey, look up to the stars. And they believe that it was the gods who gave them, all the blessings. And now God is promising something devoid of mentioning any of the gods.
And you, I mean, I know we can't go too far with this, but I'm trying to think, what does Abraham know so far? If all he knows is what we have written down, this guy doesn't even know that Yahweh's the only God yet.
True.
And and really, if you think about it, God's being pretty sympathetic with him. He's basically introducing himself to him. And well, first of all, I have to show you that I'm reliable. Uh,
Yeah.
well, you haven't done what you said you were going to do yet. So how do I
Right.
even know that? Um,
I,
and go, yeah,
it's interesting how chapter 15 comes immediately after. And I believe that I mentioned something before we were recording, in that there's the allegiance, like for example, walk before me and be perfect.
right.
God is looking for a moral and a righteous man so he can establish a covenant with them. And then I believe the whole chapter 14 is more or less is a prelude to why God is making a covenant with this guy who doesn't really know who he is.
Yes,
Because although he doesn't know who he is, he's still willing to reject the tribute that the king of Solomon is going to give him, just on a mere oath that he took. He raised his hand in an oath to Melchizedek and says, "I'm going to serve God," even though he didn't know who he was. Really,
right. Yeah. And we really don't know much about Melchizedek either. I
right?
know, but
Talk about allegiance, right?
that's
Amazing
another
loyalty.
issue. So, so, and then, and then of course you have verse 6, which is really an amazing verse, and of course Paul runs with it later on. The whole point about Abraham, he believed God and it was credited to him as rightness or righteousness. What
Yeah,
on what does this mean? Well, I think it's being purposely vague because all we want you to know is that this is like the linchpin of the whole thing is he actually believed what God said. Did he understand it much? No, but he believed, and of course Paul gives us his rabbinical view on it, as a um, an apostle to the Gentiles later on in Galatians, and I know in the book of Romans. Um, so,
Meredith Klein has a really good article on the Amen of Abraham.
hmm,
The meme. It's like the root word of that word. He believes is actually Amen. The
okay,
meme. So it would explain like God is he's asserting, believing in complete trust and faith because there was really nothing that at that moment, like you were saying, I mean, there's not really anything concrete. He doesn't have an inheritance. He doesn't have the most precious thing in his life would have been a child. So Meredith Klein, when he did that article, I really enjoyed it because I'm going like, now I know why Paul is quoting that in the Gospels because he's asking us to be as trusting in God as Abraham was. so that you can receive the inheritance.
Yes, and I hadn't thought about this till right now, but of course that's what happens when you start interacting, is that here's Abraham believing in God before he has received the completion
Yeah,
of the promise.
amazing.
And we're the same because
Right,
as now have we've received a down payment in the Holy Spirit, but we have not received, in other words, we're still in our mortal bodies. We
right.
haven't been, fully redeemed yet. Well, that's the whole point of trust. And so that's what Abraham did. So
That's cool.
that's great. So now you got God starting to talk to him, in 7, and he's rehashing, not that this isn't important, but I want to get to the really weird stuff. I think in 8, and by the way, of course, when you're talking about that Zondervan commentary, that's John Walton who wrote that.
Right.
And I don't know, sometimes I think John finds a Mesopotamian under every rock. And I
Gotcha.
do, by the way, I do too, by the
Yeah.
way. But I can't argue with that. But I
But wait a minute. Let's even it out. Wait. We need to find the balance on this.
yeah.
Okay. So let me quote the IVP, which I know one of the guys who did that.
Well, I didn't do the Genesis one. They brought me on after the first 5 books, by the
Oh,
way.
you did? Okay. I was trying to give you props there, but I got you. No,
Oh,
but I think it's kind of cool though when you guys all study the same area and then there are different focus for every teacher.
yeah, right.
Every scholar focuses on certain areas. And I was amazed when I started studying with you that you will say, well, that's not really my area. I'm going like, what are you talking about? You're an ancient Near Eastern scholar, but then you explain to me that there are different areas, just like archaeology, same way.
And it's not that I can't talk on something. It's like, all right, since that's not my area, I don't want to sound like I'm authoritative on something that I'm,
Yeah,
like
that makes sense. I think it's ethical, and that's something that very few people try to do. I know people that just make stuff up. And I rather tell them I don't know if this is not something I know, I don't teach it, or if it's an opinion, I say it. But I try not to be concrete with something that I know I cannot prove because you lose credibility that way.
Yeah, amen. Oh,
Keep going. I'm sorry. I didn't want to interrupt you.
no, that's fine. So, and then you get, and so in verse 8, and I know Walton says this, and I don't know enough to disagree with him. He thinks that, all right, in verse 8, when Abraham's saying, oh Lord God, how do I know this? I'm going to possess it. Because the first thing you do is you look at that person like, oh, that sounds like he doesn't really believe it. Just said he believed it. Now he says, that he doesn't. And by the way, I don't know whether you should read all of this sequential, like each verse happened after the previous verse. No, I think it's a summation of the whole. And so when did Abraham believed? When maybe it's after the whole thing happened. I don't know, where that point is, and maybe it's not even relevant. And
Well,
so,
actually, I would agree with you because when I understood the importance of an oath and the ramifications of what an oath represented and the penalties if you broke it, I really believe that when Abraham is not going to come and not accept a tribute from another king unless he understood the character of this particular God, that he doesn't quite understand everything yet.
yes.
But having an oath is a big deal in the ancient world. Not today as it used to be,
Oh,
but
no,
but when in chapter 15, 14, when he says, for I raised my hand in an oath, but yet where did he do it? It doesn't tell you when,
yeah, exactly right. And so we
you
don't
know.
even. And so, I mean, we're getting this information in the order that we're supposed to be getting it. But again, I think I've said this before. It's kind of like watching a movie that seems to be out of chronological order. It's for a purpose. They want you to be impressed by A, C, and D before B. And so even though B happens after 8, we're going to put it later on because it'll have a bigger impact. So we just don't know. So Walton thinks that verse 8 could be oracular. In other words, that he's asking in terms of an oracle, which would be pretty natural for a Mesopotamian polytheist to ask, is like, how am I going to know this? How am I going to know this? It's probably not out of doubt, but like, how are you going to confirm this? Are you going to confirm it through some sort of ritual? Am I supposed to go and put water
Yeah.
oil in a pot, or am I going to supposed to sacrifice a sheep and look at its entrails? By the way, he couldn't do that. He'd have to get a Baru priest or not, I mean, another priest to do that. And so he's probably asking that question because without knowing that, it looks like he's doubting.
Yeah, can I add something to that?
Yeah,
I was reading about that in this in the commentaries, and John Barry from Lexham, he actually makes a covenant. He makes the same connection as you. It says this is not an expression of doubt that would undermine Abraham's statement of faith. In verse 6, the Lord now offers Abraham land. Such transaction in the ancient Near East required a covenant ceremony. And I
yeah,
think he was asking for the ritual, like
yes,
you mentioned,
yeah,
to validate so no one can do away with the validity of what he's claiming. By the way, you know that right now in the world, I don't know if this is of it's connected, but it's dealing with the land. Um, the three main the three main contested areas in Israel that are being fought over by the Palestinians, all three of them, we have deeds of that land. I mean, we have actually Hebron, we know who it belongs to.
right,
East Jerusalem, we know who it belongs to. It's been purchased. The Bible actually cites the purchase prices and the areas, as well as Yanin, which is actually Shechem. That area was purchased by Jacob. So the
right.
three main areas that they're fighting over is actually we have the evidence in the Bible of a purchase deed of a gift. By the way, they have to buy, although the land is a gift to them.
No, exactly right. And I think that, well, in fact, I suppose the purchase is the proof that the
Right.
deed existed. But yeah, and so, but then you get to nine. I mean, what God asked him is so so odd. Here's my New American Standard. Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, and a 3-year-old female goat, and a 3-year-old ram, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he brought all these to him and cut them in two and laid them half opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds. Again, there's probably a reason we need to know that. Um,
Yeah.
but and I'm not convinced I understand exactly what it is, but this is clearly a covenant ritual that we know, and I know that you've read this, and so this is really good for the viewers right now, is that this is not uncommon, and it's really McCarthy uh, who really, when he first wrote his book, his dissertation was in the early 60s. And so when he came out with his treaty and covenant, it was land breaking. I think that
Yeah.
even mentions that the only person who had attempted to bring this together, that this is connected to other rituals, was Bickerman, a Jewish scholar from the 40s and 50s. In fact, I don't. You might know Bickerman. He wrote a little booklet called Four Strange Books of the Bible, and he just talks about oddities. But anyway,
Uh-huh.
the the Hittite covenant rituals, by the way, were found in the 20s. Unfortunately for the Anglo world, I suppose, is that you know
German.
yeah, they were all in German. And by the way, that was they almost the excavation site of Hattusha was almost excavated by Garstang, and so it had all been in English. But Garstang lost out to the Germans when the Turks were deciding who would take deed to the dig, and so that was. I'm saying this tongue in cheek. That was terrible for those who have a hard time with German. And so 90% of Hittite studies is done in German. Well, I shouldn't say 90%, at least in the early years it was. Anyway, so the Hittite covenant rituals, and the one that I found most interesting is the one that is in Hallow's big book, Context of Scripture. This is the first volume, and text number 61 is a very short ritual between the pieces. It was translated by Billie Jean Collins, who has done
What page?
some.
What page is that one? I have in logos.
It's actually page 160,
What is that second or what? One?
volume one.
Okay.
And so Billie Jean Collins, who, by the way, has written some really nice work on Hittites in the Bible,
Okay.
um, and really nice lady. So this is but the problem is the rituals that it's connected to don't appear to have any contextual relationship with what's happening in Genesis, which makes it even more confusing. So this is a ritual after your army's defeated.
Yeah.
So this would be done by the Buffalo Bills right now, or or the Washington Commanders, or whatever
But but
they're.
it would make perfect sense to do it after they've been defeated.
Yes,
Many people don't realize when you study ancient Near East, being defeated represented that the sovereign that you're serving and the God that he serves has no power. The other
yes,
kingdom dominated them, so it was a way to have a covenantal renewal with the king who got defeated. This is very important to them because if
yes,
not, they'll lose the whole kingdom.
yes. And so this is very brief. It's as if, and so this is some sort of lustration ritual, she says, in the event of military defeat. Um, if troops are defeated by the enemy, then they behind the river ritual as follows. Behind the river, they sever a human. First thing is a human being. She
Yeah,
assumes it's probably some sort of captive. A billy goat, a puppy, and a piglet. By the way, they always have puppies in their
yeah,
ritual, and they always are slicing them up, unfortunately. On the side, they set halves, and on the other side, they set the other half. In front, they make a gate of hawthorn, which she assumes means it's hawthorn because you're going to walk through, and as you're walking through, you're going to rub up against the hawthorn, and it's going to rub the sin away from you, I guess. Um, and then they burn a fire on the other side, they burn another fire, and they go through, and so it's some sort of purification ritual. Um, and we've always known about these, and of course, Jeremiah 34 mentions it, but you sort of assume you can't really tell from there because it's anecdotal. Is this a common thing? Is it normative? Um, and then you think,
Well, Jeremiah kind of uses the same language.
yes,
Jeremiah 34, verse 18 and 19
yeah,
uses the same thing.
yeah. And then of course but when we start looking at these covenants, and there's Hittite covenants, but there's other ancient Near Eastern, covenants, is that they usually they would do a ritual like this, especially by the way, that wasn't a covenant, but in a covenant, you would have a lesser and a greater. And for example, the Assyrians would have matilu, and they would chop off the head of a lamb.
Right.
And the point is, okay, this is going to happen to you if you break the covenant. Okay.
Right.
That doesn't seem to be going on here in Genesis 15.
Or it's a unilateral instead of a
Yes.
bilateral.
Yes. And then and then And then you get to verse 12. Well, the sun was going down. People have argued, well, wait a minute, it was night a minute ago. Well, first of all, it probably didn't take, if you look at verse 9, it probably didn't take an hour for Abraham to go get a 3-year-old heifer and a goat it might have taken him days to go and get all that stuff. And of course, the
Yeah.
Bible isn't interested in the time frame at that point. That's not sometimes it is interested in it. So verse 12, Abraham has a deep sleep who fell upon him, and then this terror and great darkness. I guess so. Um, and then after God prophesies to him about what the future is going to be, which of course makes perfect sense to anyone who's reading this. Oh, he's talking about us, and
Right.
what happened to us. Um, then what I'm really interested in is 17. It came about that because who goes through the fire afterward? In other words, somebody has to go through the pieces, you know,
Right.
uh, uh, and I said, well, is it God? Well, but it's not God. When it came about, when the sun had set, it was very dark, and behold, there appeared, or a smoking oven and a flaming torch, which passed between these pieces. What on earth? Why do we need to know that? Abraham knows exactly what's going on here, although I can't tell you what the meaning is behind it. My one of my professors, Mikolovsky, wrote an article about this and this is the studies in honor of Bill Hallow, the tablet and the scroll, which you've probably seen before, I'm guessing.
Yeah. But I
Um,
don't have it. I don't have that one, but
Oh yeah, it's a really a great book. Although it's because he was a Syriologist and a biblicist, there's lots of good stuff. But here's Mikolovsky's article on the torch and the censer. And Mikulášsky always tried very, very hard never to make any biblical connections because he was tired. In fact, he would, when we would go to meetings, if he saw a bunch of us that are Bible believers all together, he says, "You guys have kids?" I said, "Yeah, I got four, he's got three." Whatever. He says, "Oh man, that means you guys are going to reproduce. There's going to be more of you. That's terrible." Um, and he's making light of it, of course.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the
yeah.
point is, the torch and the center here are representing. It's a purification ritual in Mesopotamia where you would take fire and this censer, but they're also associated with two deities. Gibil, which is this a Sumerian god of fire. It's fire. It's
Hmm.
personified fire. And then the other one, Kura, we don't know exactly what Kura, but she's some sort of purification uh, uh, deity. She's a girl. Um, and Abraham would have understood this. And I'm thinking, why on earth is God? This is, in other words, this is not some sort of obscure Israelite ritual um, that is going to be used later on. Not at all. It's
Yeah.
never used again. So why is God doing this? Because he's meeting Abraham where Abraham would understand that. Somebody's got to go through it. Well, it's not, but God doesn't go through it. Does this represent God? If it does, then God, of course, is transcending all of the polytheistic, nonsense that's being put out. I just don't understand it. But again, where's Abraham at this point in terms of understanding? All he knows is that this God's given me a good deal, and I believe it, and he seems to be trustworthy. Does Abraham fully understand what that means? No. But I don't think he understood it any more than Naaman does in Second Kings 5. And of course, Jesus brings him up in Luke 4 I suppose, in the spiritual hall of fame with the Syrophoenician woman, uh,
Right.
Syr, uh, Ephraimite woman. So anyway, so I'm
You know,
just,
the Targum. You know the Targums, right? The Targums. It actually it says that it was the Memra, the word that appeared to him in a vision. It's quite interesting.
yeah, and of course, and and but I think it's pretty clear that the Genesis 15 does not say God went through the parts.
Right.
And I don't know, I mean, and of course commentators don't always see that because they'll say, well, God, is God, pronouncing a curse upon himself? Well, no, of course not.
Yeah.
Uh, that so I don't know what's going on there, but I find it really interesting. And so here we have this grant given to Abraham. It's a ritual that he wouldn't understand, but again, it's probably representing the survival of some sort of pagan rites that he would make sense.
Recognize.
But these are there. We have parts of them here. In other words, we have part of this ritual over here. We have a piece over here, piece over here, but we don't know how this one is used. But the reader would understand.
Would you think that the the parts of the ritual will be complete? For example, there are steps to an ancient covenantal ritual, right? Bilateral, like a covenant, a suzerain vassal treaty, right? So
Right.
let's say we're doing a covenant between two people in which they're using the whole between the pieces. Well, here we have one person, Abraham asleep, and it's interesting. The same word "deep sleep" is the same word used in Genesis in regards to Adam.
Yes.
Quite interesting to that.
Yep.
But you have the agreement of terms, and I think that happens a little later, because that's what goes on later in the chapter. The ceremonial preparation with the animals,
Yeah.
the sacrifices, then the oath and the ritual act, and then the public declaration. So, do you think that the circumcision at the end is a ratification by Abraham
Right.
that he accept this particular conditions of the covenant?
Yeah, and it's really, you think about how odd it is that in between Genesis 16, his wife and he try to take matters in their own hands.
Right?
Uh,
Yeah.
and you're thinking, yeah, that'd be me, like, okay, God, that's good. Now let me see if I can help you along.
Well, I
Uh,
mean, thinking as a Mesopotamian, that's where he came from.
yeah,
He's thinking as a logical man. He's not
Yep.
thinking. I think that shows you how grounded he was in logic and the reality of life. He's not thinking as in the sky something supernatural is going to happen. He is actually using what he understood, which was the regular law of finding an heir somehow, some way.
Yeah. And
That's just what I think.
I think you're right. So my son's going to be my legal, in other words, he'll
Right.
be legal son, and of course, you think about it, God's giving him information in increments, and so it's really no different than us. And we kind of think that, oh, God's leading me towards this, and so I need to do this and this, and then of course the door is closed or what happens, and of course it never turns out the way that we think. So
Yeah.
um, so anyway, but I want to get back to McCarthy for a minute. He was what's so important about his book, because now you read about it, you read this 60 years later, it's like, oh yeah, this is a nice summary, but it's not up to date. Well, of course not. How can you be up to date if you wrote it 60 years ago? But it's so important because nobody had really made the connection between all of those covenant rituals that had been found with the Hittites and the other people groups, and
Uh-huh.
with the Bible. And of course, before this, they also assumed that the covenant that is mentioned in Genesis is actually a much later addition that is superimposed upon Abraham. And of course, that's why, when you're reading a lot of these writers, I'm sure you understand a lot of them, of course, are ascribing to the Wellhausen JEDP theory about
Right.
authorship, etc., which, by the way, no Mesopotamian scholar, we just scoff at that stuff because it's a complete misunderstanding of the whole nature of authorship, and how that works. But of course, that overpowered um, the biblical tradition for so long, and so they just anticipate that this is all projected backwards. Now we find all these rituals, realize, wait a minute, the writer who's writing this actually understands late Bronze Age ritual procedures. How does that, how did, and the only way that they understand it is because it's probably has, even if you think it might have been written later, the writer understands the late bronze context.
Okay, so anyone who studies engineering and really is a scholar of the engineering will read that chapter and they will know that the context of that chapter parallels the rituals of the late Bronze Age.
Yes, but they
Beautiful.
didn't. But nobody had bothered really looking at it and publishing it until McCarthy did.
Yeah,
Um, and
I got
so
it.
that's what's so important about his book. Um, and I remember getting this. I probably got it through Eisenbrauns. So this was the later edition, 1981. But in this, the Pontifical Institute Press, they always were so much
Yeah,
money.
it's not available.
No, I'm sure it's not. And I tried to get it on as PDF file, and that's at least right now it's not available.
Yeah.
But anyway, so so it helps me. To me, I'm satisfied now that the parts that I did not understand in Genesis 15, uh, I just can't understand them. In other words, we just don't have enough information. At least I can now provide a context for it, and a context for the whole concept of rituals. The Akkadian word for ritual is a cognate. It's biritu, um, and
Like
it
Brit.
it just means a binding or a fetter.
Right.
You know, and so and it's not necessarily the problem in Akkadian is that um, they use a number of different words, and so there doesn't seem to be one singular one that's that that's connected. And of course, they used these for everything. I mean, almost better term might even just be contract.
Right.
But we don't like the word contract because it doesn't have a religious flavor to it in the West. And so it's like, oh, contract, that's, what, we do with, when we buy a house or whatever. No, it's contract and covenant basically have the same purpose,
Mm-hmm.
binding yourself to an agreement or to another person or
Yeah.
whatever, it
I,
means.
I've always been really intrigued by the way the Sinai covenant is structured as a bilateral with apodictic and casuistic commandments and stuff like that,
Yeah.
formula. And then you have the Genesis 15, which is all about granting Abraham a gift. He gave him the descendants and the inheritance.
Yes.
So it's quite interesting because that seems to be the whole motif of Paul in the whole first centuries. How do the Gentiles get adopted into this house so they can receive the gift that God promised Abraham, that in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed?
Yeah.
So, can we talk a little bit about the unilateral nature of a grant covenant and why the king would do it?
Yeah, sure. And I know we were talking about this beforehand, but the whole point is to me, I'm really interested in I do not have a good handle on this yet, and so this is an area for me to study. I mean, I like I told you before, I did minor fields in Greek and Roman, and so I
Yeah,
can certainly understand the New Testament context, but it's not my comfort zone in terms of being like confident that I really know what I'm talking about
gotcha.
in every situation. On the other hand, as a believer, I really want to understand that well and to
Yeah,
make those connections. And so even if I don't call myself a theologian, if I'm a believer, I'm a theologian. Uh,
yeah.
every
You,
we're all supposed to be.
right. I mean, like for example, in the article by Wainfeld, he has a little part of it says the unconditional gift. If you don't mind, can I read it? Is that okay?
Sure.
Um, because sometimes we read things in the first century writings in regards to the gospels, and we don't really understand the argument Paul is trying to make. And sometimes I think we misunderstand a lot of the not theological, but legal rights of a believer in
Yeah.
Messiah, and what we are going to inherit. So I'm going to read here from his article. I just took a little few notes here. It talk about functionally, however, there's a vast difference between the two types of documents. Okay, talk about the suzerain vassal. While the treaty constitutes an obligation of the vassal to his master, the suzerain, the grant covenant constitutes an obligation of the master to his servant.
Yes.
In the grant, the curse is directed towards the one who will violate the rights of the king's vassal. So that makes sense that if you speak against the land of Israel, all the people of Israel, or anything that God has given to the people, then you're fighting against God Himself because He's the
Yeah.
one who gave it.
Yeah, and I no, I think you're absolutely right. And though I when I even look at Genesis 15, I don't think it's congruent. In other words, can I simply say, "Oh yeah, this is just a grant"? No, it's definitely a a it's definitely a covenant, but whether or not I can be certain that it's just a grant and exactly like this. In other words, you know, and like, yeah, the curse is directed towards the one who will violate,
Right.
well, God obviously won't violate it. It's a reward for loyalty and good deeds. You think about it, when Abraham is offered this, he hasn't done a thing in
Yeah.
Genesis 12. He hasn't done a thing yet. And
Yeah.
so the point you're right is God knows, and of course for us we're thinking, well, of course he's God. God's loyal. He's God, but God has to prove he's loyal to somebody who doesn't know him. And it's really, it really is analogous to anything that happens in the present age. If you're talking to somebody who doesn't believe, you know,
Yeah.
you know, how do you prove your God's, loyal or righteous or even exists, it really is upon God to do that from that standpoint, even though we recognize we're the ones who've gone away from God. Um,
Yeah.
but he's made it his mission to, come to us. And so that's theology.
It's quite interesting. Let me read a little bit more because I'm going to read this paragraph here
Yeah.
that really shows the importance of when a king will give a grant that no one can touch it. So it says, "What is more, while the grant is a reward for loyalty and good deeds already performed, the treaty is an inducement of future loyalty." It says Abraham is promised the land because he obeyed God and followed his mandate. So he obeyed,
Right.
like in Exodus chapter, 16 here, 5, and in chapter 22, verse 16 and 18. And then it
Genesis,
says,
yeah.
right. and it says, giving grace of dynasty because he served God with truth, righteousness, and loyalty. The terminology used in this context is very close to that of the Assyrian grants. And that's why I
Yes.
wanted to read it because this is your area. And I want to make
Yeah.
sure that thus in the grant of Ashurbanipal to his servant Bulta, I read, Bartai, but
Baltia.
yeah,
Baltia.
there you go. Whose
Yeah.
heart is devoted or is hold to his master, serve me, literally stood before me. Now it makes sense when it says, stand before me and be perfect. You
Yeah.
know, yeah,
Exactly.
it says, with truthfulness, acted perfectly, literally walked in perfection, walked before me in my place, and grew up
Ellen.
with good name
Yeah.
and kept my charge of my kingship. Similar formulations are found in connection with promises to Abraham. That's a great connection.
Yes, it's perfect. And so the language is the same. And so because you are doing these things for me, then I'm going to grant it to you. And so God begins with offering it to Abraham, and then he walks in his steadfastness. And what would have happened if Abraham didn't? I don't know. That's
Yeah, I think he
not
would
our
have found
issue.
somebody else. I mean,
Yeah,
we have an example of when Israel did not walk in uprightness and God offered to Moses, hey, let me get rid of these people and I'll start with you again. But what's interesting about that is that, and I come back to this real quick, if I may, what is interesting about that offer that God made Moses, if Moses would have says, great idea, let's get rid of these people, God would have not broken this covenant in Genesis 15
yes,
because he was a descendant of Abraham.
right, exactly right.
That's quite of interesting people to make the connections.
And just thinking of Moses for a second as a side, nobody talks to God like Moses does. He argues with him. I think he's sometimes a little disrespectful in his
Talk
implementation, but that's neither.
about friendship. Let me
Yeah,
finish this particular paragraph here. It says, and the reason why I like to read the paragraph, even though you are an expert in this area, is so that I want the audience to also understand that this is not only your opinion or based on your research. This is something well attested in the
yeah,
ancient, in the scholarly world. And I want us to give the audience as much information as we can
yeah.
because many of them don't know you, and I want them to know you because you're validating everything,
Write to
everything
me,
that you know.
email me. Yes,
That's right. Says unconditional gift, also from the Wainfeld article. Although the grant of Abraham and David is close in this formulation to the Neo-Assyrian grants, there might be late. The promises themselves are much older and reflect the Hittite pattern of the grant, land and house, the dynasty. The objects of the Abrahamic and Davidic covenants, respectively, are indeed the most prominent gifts of a suzerain in the Hittite and Syro-Palestinian political reality. And like the Hittite grants, so also the grant of land to Abraham and the grant of house to David are unconditional.
yes.
Thus, we read that in the treaty of Hattus, how do you pronounce that one?
I can't see it
Oh,
actually
I'm
right
sorry,
here.
Hattusilig.
Hatusili. Yeah.
Yeah, Hattusilig, one of your descent. This is really important. It says, Hattusilig or to do.
Tutalias. By the
There you
way,
go.
Tutalias is probably Tidal in Genesis 14.
Oh, cool. All right, I didn't know
Doesn't
that.
mean it doesn't mean it's the same guy, it's the same name.
Got it. Got it. Got it. So, and then we have to make it bigger. So it says, and the Ulmitasuv of that tasa says, after you, and this is the key, in my opinion, to understand this particular covenant, grant covenant that is connected completely with Israel and the Gospels, in my opinion. It
Yes.
says, after you, your sons and grandson will possess it. Nobody will take it away from them. Paul says the gifts of God are irrevocable. If one of your descendants sins, the king will persecute him at his court. Then, when he is found guilty, if he deserves death, he will die. But nobody will take away from the descendants of Ulmitasuv either his house or his land in order to give it to a descendant of somebody else. That is a huge statement.
Yes. And by the way, I would say and this I think is a pattern for everything when you study ancient Near East, is the ancient Near East provides a context to better understand the Bible. It's not a proof text. In other words, I
Yeah.
wouldn't read that and say, well, because this happens here, then the Bible must be talking about the same thing. No, it helps me understand it better. And so now
Right.
I'm moving towards the idea, oh, this is an unconditional gift. Um, and if it's not necessarily spelled out as much as I would like it to be spelled out, then at least I have a context for realizing everyone already knows that this is what it means. By the way, you got to work on your Hittite pronunciation.
It's
But
terrible. I know. I got to learn Akkadian.
well, Hittite's pretty tough too, but that's all
All
right.
right.
Not
Well,
nearly.
I mean, so if we're gonna go through the, how much time you got, by the way?
Oh, we 20 minutes, 20
Okay,
some. Yeah,
perfect.
okay.
All right. So the land and the inheritance based on Genesis 15 becomes now a guaranteed by God to the descendants of Abraham, regardless whether they obey or disobey. Now they get
Right.
punishment if they
Yeah.
disobey, but they cannot lose the land.
I I don't see anywhere where it says that they can lose the land. And of course, that's
Correct.
a really controversial spot, in many Christian traditions where, of course, if you are hardcore, reformed, the church becomes the new Israel. In other words, just replaced.
Yeah,
Uh,
I know. It's kind of crazy, but especially when Ephesians says we become part of the commonwealth of Israel, which is citizenship. In
yes,
light of the Greco-Roman world, a Greek, I'm sorry, a Greek or Roman slave or a freedman, they really have no citizenship. Only the
right.
plebeians and the patricians. So, I mean, when Paul is really telling these people, if you accept Yeshua, God is going to give you remission from death, and he's going to seal you with his spirit as his property. Then he's going to make you a citizen. He's going to adopt you. And he's going to give you land. Oh my Lord, what an offer!
Yeah, yeah. How could you refuse that? And so So, but in other words, but that's a very powerful tradition in the church, is that the church became the new Israel. And of course, there's lots of different groups who still believe that. Then, of course, you have others who are in the middle and then go far to the right. And so it's obviously a hot theological potato, I suppose, in the church tradition. You know that very well.
Yeah, but let's let's talk a little bit about that, but not as a point of argument, but a point of observation from a legal perspective, biblical legal contract perspective. As you know, there was an oath. There was a change of name for Abraham and Sarah, meaning that now they're adopted into God's house. You
Yes,
know, they belong to his family.
right.
And it's interesting that the letter that was added is the letter Hey, which represents the breath of God or the Spirit of God. It's kind of interesting. And then now they ratified with the circumcision. And then God promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and Israel. So, and in the New Testament, there's not one shred of evidence that says that now the church replaced Israel. So let's talk about it from a legal perspective and a covenantal perspective. If the gifts of God are irrevocable, which you and I agree on that,
Yes,
okay, then if we follow the sequences of the letters of Paul in its context to the audience and what he's trying to convey, which is salvation as a gift, it's also a grant,
yes,
and also sanctification to come into the kingdom, because the kingdom is the one who receives the land, you
right.
know? So it follows a line of consistency through the prophets and also the New Testament. Um, so legally, if someone will say, well, God did away with his people Israel, would that stand according to the biblical principles of law? Forget about theology. Let's talk about honestly about evidence and law.
I don't see anything I can think of that would revoke it. In other words, I don't see anything being conditional. And so I guess my simple answer would be no. It's
Yeah.
that it looks like a legal contract. And so I just look at, all right, what I haven't really studied yet is really, what does it mean then when the treaty continues to be updated? You're right, it's usually a modification of
Yeah.
an existing treaty. If if you were going to reverse the treaty, you'd have to start over.
And by the way, that will go against the treaty format and
Yes.
formula and
Yeah.
also the oath. We will have a big problem because
Yeah.
then we'll break his treaty and then his oath is null and void.
And if that's the case, we're all in
We're,
big.
we're in big trouble.
Yeah.
So I think there's a, would you agree with me that there's a disconnect in the, we're not going to criticize people in the systems of religion because, like I've always said, I met a lot of pastors, and every single pastor I've met, they're doing their best to teach you what they know. Okay,
Yeah, right.
and but would you agree with me that theology and the eisegesis, I'm sorry, I got to pronounce it in English.
I
I do it
said
in Spanish.
yes.
The way we give our own interpretation instead of the text exegesis, sometimes that's creating such a divide that has created anti-Semitism within the church, unfortunately,
Yeah,
because of the lack of understanding.
yeah, and of course, and we've talked about this before. I don't know whether it was privately or on tape, but you know, that's a sore spot. Of course, it really has its roots in antiquity
Yeah,
more than in modern times. And of course, like we've talked about before, the new, for example, when John uses the term Jews and talking about, he's talking about the Jewish religious intelligentsia in most cases. Sometimes he's talking about the Jewish people, but in most
right,
cases, he's talking about the Jewish leaders who are now, of course, doing what they did to Christ.
right,
And the early church then took it upon themselves just to argue that any of those Jewish peoples who did not accept Jesus as Messiah are
right.
part of that group, and so therefore they're outside, and
And
they're
you and you know what's crazy about it is like we know Nicodemus believed in the Messiah. We know that 3,000 believe in the Messiah. There was not one Gentile, even the guy who was considered a Gafir or proselyte. They're making conversion, so they're living as Hebrew people. And then you have in Acts chapter 6, I think, many of the priests believed in the faith. And then you have 5,000 more, and they have on the miracles of Yeshua. You got thousands of people. So sometimes even the word Jews is referring to Judea,
right.
the geographical location.
And of course, as a historian, and since this isn't my primary area, what I would like to study maybe at some point is really what happens to those Jewish Christians, those who adopt the Messiah, and of course I'm using that terminology, but those who adopt that who adopt Jesus as Messiah, what happens to them over time? They're probably, in terms of numbers, so overwhelmed by the Greeks who become believers, the Gentiles, is that
Yeah,
their identity is either watered down or lost. And of course, and so and so then you so that divide between Jew and Christian now becomes those who didn't accept Messiah and
right.
those who did.
I'm
Uh,
doing the I'm doing the research on the book of Revelation. And one of the things that I've been researching is exactly that. When did that divide occur? And I noticed that in Acts 15, verse 19 and 20 and 21, there was a direct instructions. That's what to do when you come in the gospel. And the same rules you find in Leviticus chapter 11 through 18.
yeah,
And it's a core of conduct in a synagogue or being part of the community. It's called holiness,
yeah,
kedusha. What's interesting is after the destruction of the temple, that's a pivotal moment in history that changed the whole worldview. In other words, the Romans no longer really wanted the Jews. They were troublemakers because of what happened in Rome, in
yeah,
Jerusalem. And then now the Jews are turning on each other because they're losing their privileges.
yeah.
And then you have the troublemakers, the Gentiles, who are living like the Jews, who are saying, wait a minute, what are you doing to us? And the anti-imperial message, Yeshua as the Kyrios, right, instead
Uh,
of the emperor. Man, what chaos.
yeah.
Um,
And so, yeah, that's exactly right. And so, and what do we do with all these Gentiles in Acts 15? Well, make sure they abide by the holiness so they don't look like pagans any longer. Because,
right.
of course,
Yeah. That's
and
the only book they had was the Torah and the prophets. They didn't have anything. The New Testament did not exist as a canon at the time. So, I
right.
mean, they were teaching them from the Torah and the prophets. Quite interesting. Um, I know we have limited time. And by the way, man, I really love talking to you.
This is fun.
Um, we talk all the time. We have fun other than baseball because I know we still friends but enemies anyway, but it's okay. Um,
Opponents. Yeah.
yeah. But in regards to, let's talk about the grant. We know the land now is a grant. The descendants of Israel is a grant. The Davidic dynasty for kingship is a grant, so no one can take it away. So would you just me throw this out there for you? So the prophecy of the scepter departing from Judah, basically deals with Herod being the king who's not of the tribe of Judah. That's
Okay. Yeah.
that could be part of, you know, maybe interpretation, okay? But in regards to the priesthood, there's a huge controversy on this side of the aisle that I'm dealing with, which deals with the order of Melchizedek, and we may agree or disagree. We never really talked about it anyway,
Oh,
so
we have.
but it's okay. Um, but it's interesting because people ask me all the time, how come you're not a proponent of everyone being in the order of Melchizedek? And I like to propose this, that the Bible says Yeshua becomes in that order only in the heavenly tabernacle, because even Hebrews chapter 8:4 says he was on earth, he would not be a priest, for they're already priests according to the
Right.
law. So
Right.
and the reason why that's important is because if the gifts of God are irrevocable, that means that the grant given to the sons of Aaron and the Levites, like in Malachi chapter 1 through 4, and Numbers chapter 18 and chapter 3 of Numbers, is very significant that we learn it's a legal thing. So, would you agree then that just like you and I were talking about Israel receiving the grant of the land and descendants, or then when Aaron and the Levites received the grant of the priesthood, that's also irrevocable. No one can take it away.
Yes, and now, and my answer was yes, that's true. And what does that mean now? I don't know. And that's the big question, because I don't know the next step, and I haven't studied it enough
Yeah.
to know as how that all works out. And so you're right, that's irrevocable. I also don't know what to do with, the last 9 chapters of Ezekiel either, but that's another issue that we can talk about at some point. But and
That will
so
be a fun conversation.
yeah, that'll be a fun conversation. I'll have to get my Daniel Block commentary out and see what it says. And that's, of course, has been a very, very difficult section for the church to deal with. Is what on earth is going on here?
They don't study the temple. That's a common denominator. You
No,
know, I mean, think about it. I mean, look, in baseball today, the number one attribute of a player to look for is power in the hitter and arm strength in the pitcher.
yeah,
Everything else you accommodated according to. I was a
yeah,
baseball scout, so baseball that I know. Okay, but before it wasn't like that. You have five tools. You can run, speed, strength, arm strength, power. Then you have to have fielding and you have to have hitting, right?
yeah,
But now, if you hit the ball 400 feet, 450 feet, you have a better upside than you did if you were a line drive hitter, you know, a 300 and 330 hitter, you know, average.
uh,
Well, what we understand is that the Bible is structured in a particular way. And unfortunately, we do not consider the core. There's a reason why the book of Leviticus is smack in the middle of the five books of Moses.
yeah,
And then there's 279 commandments directly linked to the temple out of 613.
yeah.
But yet that's the area that is least studied in scholarly circles, as you know, and also in the church system because it's not very much, there's not a temple, out of sight, out of
Right.
mind, you
Yep,
know?
you're exactly right. And you've helped me understand that. And so I'm when I'm reading the New Testament, I'm becoming alerted to it. Like, all right, there is some language here that makes more sense if you
Yeah.
understand it in the context of temple. And so I'm at that infant stage where I'm at least thinking about it, whereas before
Yeah.
never crossed the mind, because of what you just said is, well, there's no temple, what, we're the temple now. Uh,
Yeah.
that analogy is not perfect, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, when you go back to that First Corinthians verse, and you looked it up carefully in chapter 1, verse 1 to 3, he's talking to the ecclesia, to the whole body at large.
Yeah,
He's not talking to the individual. And that really kind of raised my concern. I said, wait a minute, we're using verse 16 of chapter 3 out of context. He's talking to the overall community as one entity, trying to be holy for God as a temple was. So he's using the temple as a microcosm of what God wants us to learn about holiness. And you know, when it comes to covenants, it's the same thing. I mean, the language of covenant is so prevalent throughout the prophets and the Psalms and even in the New Testament. And
yeah.
sometimes we're not in tune of it, you know, and it's kind of sad. We lose a lot of blessings.
No, I agree. And so no, it's causing me to do a shift and start looking at it And first, I have to do it as my historian to try to put it in context, and then as a believer, I want to try to understand how this
Right.
works and fleshes out. So
Well, I mean,
there's definitely two ways, Rico. Believe me.
absolutely. I mean, that's a beautiful thing about the dialogue.
Yeah,
It's like I'm gaining a lot of insight because I'm not. See, I'm like maybe like Kitchen a little bit that or like Walton that I want to see ancient Near East and everything
yeah.
because out of everything in the Old Testament, maybe like 60, 70% is ancient, maybe more because they live in that environment. But
Well,
then,
when I say that, it's the pot calling the kettle black, and so
I know.
saying that.
Uh,
Yeah,
but it's only logical if the whole Israel is surrounded by people living in the same environment. Like, for example, the new moon. I asked Juan and I were studying this weekend for my Torah portion on Saturday. And I just asked the question, I said, wait a minute, if everything is a contrast to Canaanite myth and the whatever worship, then why does God say the new moon now becomes a beginning of years for you? Well, then I went back and I looked at the gods of the Canaanites for the moon. I'm thinking, oh, it's about life and death. Temple's about life. So God eliminates any kind of myth by putting a altar and saying on the new moon, you're going to dedicate this on the altar, automatically eliminating any mythicism or any kind of myth in regards to the moon.
and I think I brought this up way back some other one, but it's really perfect here. The moon god is the primary deity at Ur, and then when Abraham goes to Haran,
Yeah.
same deity. It's the only two places that I know of, and
Yeah.
so there's some really delicious irony there when God is bringing that up, and the fact that in Genesis when he talks about the sun and the moon, he doesn't even dignify them with their names.
That's true. Luminaries.
Yeah, big light, little light, or whatever, and so there's
I didn't think about that. I
yeah,
didn't think about that. He didn't even mention them.
yeah,
Actually, as a matter of fact, it gives them function. He just says, okay, that's just for times and seasons. They have
Prof,
nothing else with idolatry, no
yeah,
power.
yeah,
That's
yep,
kind of cool.
yeah, very
Can I
cool.
can I finish up today with a controversial
Yeah.
topic?
All right.
Oh, all right, just like that? That easy?
Well, I'll see whether I think it's controversial or not.
But by the way, guys, I want you to know, not everybody is willing to exchange in a manner of edification. Sometimes people get together and they talk, and it's all about a competition for honor, who knows more. I'm honored to have the exchange of somebody that I could talk to and exchange freely without any kind of defensive mechanisms or any competition. It's all for the purpose of growing and learning. And it feels great because sometimes in the circles that I deal with, without really meaning to, the people argue because they're defending what they know and they feel threatened when they hear something
Yeah,
foreign.
exactly right.
Do you find that also a lot in the
Oh,
colleges when you were there?
oh, of course, it's human nature, and so I have to realize that, gee, am I going to get you to agree with me by calling you stupid? And can you
Yeah,
believe such and such? It probably wouldn't work on me, so why would it work on you? But the whole point is really, if you think about it, we're being asked to love one another. And so what does that mean? It's being patient and kind. And and so what's my goal in talking to you? It's for me on my side, it's well, I'm going to be stretched and I'm going to learn something, and hopefully it'll be with you. And of course, I believe
yeah,
I'm providing specialized information that I'm hoping will be of benefit to other people. And
right.
so and and I also don't want to have I don't want to be tied to the information that I have as if it's part of me. And so it's like, oh, I guess I was wrong there. Or, in other words, if I take offense or feel threatened, it's as if my own identity is wrapped up in this particular, belief that I have.
Yeah.
And
What,
if
what
that's the case, I'm in trouble.
would an example of that would be when somebody tells you, "Well, God revealed to me. I had this revelation." I mean, what can you do with that? I mean, if you say you don't agree because you have the facts, they're gonna be perceived like you insulting them.
Well, uh, and I guess I know what can you say? Something like that's really great. I'm glad that God did that for you, and but if you say God revealed to me that you should be doing such and such, my answer would be, can I get a second opinion?
Yeah.
I mean, I know a minister who was very popular in some of my circles who believed that God took him up in a chariot like um, Elisha, and he came back and had all sorts of cool information. I said, I suppose I'd like to, after thinking that sounds really ridiculous, but let's just say it's possible, because it is. Well, how does it match up, with the
Right.
word? Because of
I don't
course,
think people want to be challenged that way anymore, though.
well, but and by the way, this person fell. It was revealed that he was a charlatan, and
Yeah.
so the whole point there was, all right, so you're going to pray for understanding, etc. So the whole
Yeah.
point, it's the heart attitude. And that's why I liked Mike Heiser so much, because I could tell he didn't care whether you accepted his opinion or not. It's like, I don't care, just read the text.
Yeah.
I'm not, and you could tell he really believed what he said.
Yeah. Well, that's an attribute that I'm trying to develop
Yeah.
because I'm very blessed to have good teachers. Joseph Good, you heard him. He's very knowledgeable on that topic that he covers.
Yeah.
And also his behavior is a humble man. Then I study with you and you're the same way. So it's like I'm trying to surround myself with people that are highly educated, but yet they are willing to hear, to listen, to study, to exchange. And I'm trying to, imitate that because the more I learn, the more I realize how much I'm missing, how much I miss stuff. Sometimes assumptions is what leads us into trouble.
Yeah.
So lastly, just to finish it up, let's talk about grants and let's attach it to a topic that I've taught on, that I've been adamant about because I really feel I've found some legal evidence that can support my thesis. And I try to present it not to say that people are willingly, deliberately trying to do it. It's just sometimes we're misinformed.
Yep.
Okay. But when they hear it, they attack it. And that's dealing with the grant that God gave the priest in regards to the tithe. Now, again, let's talk about it from a legal perspective, not religious. Now,
Oh,
in the Numbers 18, we're going to be talking about Numbers 18 after the event of Korah and the whole
all
thing.
right.
Then God makes the sons of Aaron responsible to bear the guilt. So
Bummer.
it
Yeah.
says, and the Lord said to Abraham, you and your sons and your family with you will bear the guilt of the sanctuary, and you and your sons will bear the guilt of your priesthood. Meaning that if they mess up, they bear the responsibility. If you
Yes.
bring the offering and they don't do their job, you are innocent and they're guilty because they're responsible for it.
Right.
Okay. It says, as I keep going down, they received the role and the function, and then the Levites joined them. And then it continues to go here, and I'm going to read it real quick. In verse 8, it gets interesting. The Lord spoke to Aaron, behold, I myself have given to you the responsibility of my contributions for all of the holy objects of the Israelites. I have given them to as a portion to you and your sons as an eternal decree. Now, when he makes a decree, not even the king can change the decree. How true was that in the ancient Near East?
A decree is a decree. And so, although I don't know, I mean, what's the word there? Eternal? Is it
Chok.
olam?
No, it's chok, which is the decree,
Oh,
is a regulation
that,
statute.
that's the decree, but the word for eternal, I'm sorry, uh,
Ah, gotcha. Hold on, let me see.
probably olam,
Yeah, more than likely olam.
a really long time.
Eternal, yeah, olam.
All right. So
Olam.
as far as we know, olam goes a really, really long time. Is there an ending point? Well, we don't know because we never got there. But it's not it doesn't match the Greek word perfectly, but it's about as close as you can get in biblical Hebrew for understanding something that's endless.
Right. Well,
And
in this case, whoever decreed it, it's only valid until he dies.
right.
So if God doesn't die, then this is forever into throughout eternity.
Yeah. And now, of course, yeah, I've given you the response. Yeah. I want to study that because I know you've
Okay.
said that before, and so I want
Yeah.
to put all the pieces together.
No, not a problem. I'm just going to be getting exchanging on something, but
Yes.
I want to move on a little bit here and forward, which it says, verse 14 is key here. It says, all consecrated possessions in Israel will be for you.
Yeah.
And then when you go down a little bit more, it says right here. Where is it? I say, where's the word gift? I'm looking for it. Give me a second. I say gift to you, the priesthood. Says, but their flesh will be for you a breast section and wave, whatever, whatever, whatever. Verse 19, O contributions of
20.
holiness to the Israelites offered to, I have given to you and your sons for your daughters as an eternal decree. It's an ancient covenant of salt before the Lord, you and your offsprings. And then it says, you will receive the inheritance of the land. You will not, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yes.
And there will be not a plot of ground for you in the midst of all the Israelites. And then it says, as a gift. I'm looking for it. Give me 1 second. Juan, ¿dónde está? Give me a second. I gotta find it.
Numbers 18.
Yeah, but what verse? I can't find it right now. That's crazy. When I had it out earlier. It's a gift. There we go. Verse 6. Look, I myself have chosen your brothers, the Levites, from the midst of the children. They are a gift to you. Talking about the tithe. Verse 19. Gift. And when I looked at that word, Professor, the word there, it's actually Natan.
Oh, yeah. Nadandum in Akkadian, it's just the word for gift. Yeah.
There you go. So it's a gift. Many people don't know that, by the way.
Yeah. Right.
I'm looking for that word. I got to finish up. I'm sorry, but man, where is it? I'm pretty sure when I finish here, I'm going to find it.
Of course you will. That's a natural law. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I have given it for you. Watch. And the Lord said to Moses, saying, you will speak to the Levites and say to them, when you receive the tithe from the Israelites that I have given to you from them as for your inheritance, you will present a contribution from it to the Lord, a tithe from a tithe. That belongs to the priest. Your contribution will be credited to you like a grain offering. Basically, what it's saying is that the tithe only belongs to the sons of Aaron and the Levites.
Yes.
It's a gift.
Yes.
And it's a covenant of salt. Question. Did they have anything related with covenant of salt being used for covenantal purposes in the ancient Near East that you know of?
I'm not aware of it. I was just thinking of that covenant of salt. I said, where do I know that? And I don't. So I'd have to look it up.
Because the dynasty is also in salt covenant. You have the priesthood and the dynasty for David. It's in the salt covenant. It's quite interesting. And by the way, this is the cool part. All consecrated things, and the word there is chenem.
Yeah.
And you know that's like dedicated for God, either for destruction or for holiness.
Yes. Good or bad. Yeah.
That's a really interesting word. Man, I gotta find it's a gift. Where is that word?
Looking up McCarthy to see if he said anything about salt, and it doesn't appear to be. So
Man, I tell you. Anyway, so I know it says it's a gift. I hope I'll find it here in a minute. Priesthood as a gift. There it is. Jeez. Verse 7. But you and your sons will keep your priesthood to perform your priestly duties for everything at the altar and for the area behind the curtain. I give you the priesthood as a gift. And then it says, but the stranger who approaches will be put to death. And the word stranger there is zar. It's illegitimate, illicit. Now, is there evidence of ancient Near Eastern type of grants, which I read earlier, by the way, in which if an illegitimate person claims to possess the gift that the king did not give him, that will be a serious offense.
Well, usually what they do at the end of it, if it's on a stela, they'll talk about anybody who transgresses the stela, or if they transgress the oath of the covenant, then whatever curses are in the covenant will be superimposed upon them.
Right. Like in Deuteronomy 28, the same thing.
Yeah. So other than that, I don't know. I'm not familiar with it being any different than that.
So receiving a gift, do we have any evidence from Mesopotamian history of someone receiving a gift and then rejecting that gift?
I'm not aware of it. It probably does exist, and so I'd have to look at it. But I know people break treaties, but
Right.
and
Well,
things like that. And
well, you
so,
will break the treaty, you will die. I mean, that was a big offense.
Yeah.
So that was like, um, okay, that's cool. I just want to show if I'm following the line of thought in regards to the gift, a grant for the
Yeah.
land, but the same structure will be followed for in this case, and then also for the gift. The Spirit of God is a gift. The fruit of the Spirit is a gift.
Right.
Salvation is a gift.
Yes, and of course in Hebrews, the point of the writer is to show that the priesthood that that the son is taken is superior to the Aaronic priesthood, but he doesn't say it's null and void.
Right. Well, only because it's in the heavenly realm, and
Yeah,
they cannot officiate on the priest cannot go out there jurisdiction.
yeah,
Kind of
yes,
interesting.
good
I
point.
really enjoyed it. Anything else you want to add before we go?
No, I think I'm good. I'm learning a lot, and so my head's spinning theologically, but in a good way. And
Yeah.
I'm old enough to realize that this takes a lot of time
Yeah.
to work through, and it's a good challenge for me. And I've been praying for challenges, and so I just didn't know the challenge was named RICO.
Oh man, I'm learning a lot from you because you give me all this homework and I go back and look at it and I'm going, man, I missed that before. That's kind of now it makes sense because throughout the years reviewing all the things, I'm able to start making better connections. That's why I throw them by you because we get all excited. We think we found something, and if we don't have a peer review, then we can be do damage, and I don't want that.
Well, that's exactly right. And so even the smartest person in the world needs to have peer review. But
Yeah, which unfortunately many people don't practice.
oh, that's
Thank you
very
so much. Thank you so much. I'm gonna be seeing you soon, by the way. I'm looking forward to that.
that's right. Couple of weeks.
Yeah,
We'll
man.
discuss those details
Yeah,
soon.
we're gonna be recording it here, by the way. You're gonna be in my office.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, that'll be good. So I'm really happy to. I'm glad you got home okay. I'm glad
Yeah.
your mom is good in California. And I
Yeah.
look forward to seeing you in a few weeks here in Florida. And thank you guys for joining me. And I appreciate the patience. I hope that these exchanges that we have, and I'm learning a lot. And I'm grateful to keep growing. And I pray that we continue to find favor and continue to exchange and grow together because I'm learning a great deal. And I want to share that with as many people who give me the opportunity to hear. So may the Lord bless you guys and keep you. And thank you, Professor, again for spending your time with me. Shalom
My
to you.
pleasure. My pleasure. Bye-bye.